The 2026 bank collapse. Your money isn't safe. On February 17th, 2026, the lights in a downtown branch don't go out with a bang. They flicker like a dying heartbeat. People still believe bank collapses happen because of panic or headlines or bad luck. But that's the fairy tale they sell you while they rewrite the ledger. Banks don't die from rumors. They die from insolvency hiding on a balance sheet. We think money is safe because we can tap a screen and see a number. We think the system is protected by rules, seals, and polite suits. But the truth is colder. The moment a bank's assets can't cover its promises, it's already bankrupt. And if enough people ask for cash at once, the math becomes a guillotine. This story isn't about fear. It's about how the modern bank is a machine that turns your deposits into risk. It's about how the balance sheet can rot while the lobby still smells like fresh coffee. And in 2026, that rot doesn't creep. It sprints. The common belief is that collapses arrive like hurricanes, loud, telegraphed, impossible to miss. But financial storms form underground, in quiet rooms, in footnotes, in columns of numbers. A bank run is only the final scene. The real violence happens first on the ledger, when assets bleed value and liabilities stay fat. Think about the word deposit. It sounds like storage, like a vault, like something placed somewhere safe. But a deposit is a loan you give to the bank. You are the creditor. They are the debtor. That's not philosophy. That's the balance sheet speaking in plain language. At the peak, the banking world still looks like majesty. Marble floors, glass towers, executives in dark coats stepping out of black cars like royalty. They talk about stability like it's a natural resource like steel or oil. They show you charts that curve upward. They point at decades of calm and call it proof. The parades are digital now. Quarterly earnings calls, investor presentations, TV anchors nodding while logos glide across screens. The empire doesn't need soldiers. It has credit lines. It has liquidity facilities. It has 1,000 silent agreements stitched across continents like a spider web of debt. And the public buys it because the illusion feels good. Your paycheck arrives. Your card works. Your mortgage auto-pays. The machine hums. It feels permanent. But beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. Because banks don't run on money. They run on confidence. And confidence is just a story we tell ourselves while the ledger decides what's real. When asset values fall, confidence becomes a lie that can't be defended. The addiction began quietly, the way all addictions begin. A little leverage, a little cheap borrowing, a little temporary policy that becomes a lifestyle. Near zero rates made money feel weightless. Debt became a drug. The system learned to inhale cheap credit and call it growth. Then the monster grew teeth. The flaw was simple. Banks stuffed themselves with long-term assets priced for a low-rate world. Bonds, mortgage, commercial real estate loans dressed up as stable income. They collected yield like it was rent from a building that could never burn. They forgot one brutal rule. When rates rise, value falls. Debt became a living thing, a creature that doesn't sleep. It sits on the balance sheet like a wet animal, heavy and hungry. It demands interest payments like oxygen. And when refinancing gets expensive, the creature starts chewing. The antagonist isn't a general. It isn't a politician. It's the market itself. It's the bondholders who want higher yields. It's the rate curve, cold and indifferent. It's the creditor's question. Can you pay? And in 2026, that question becomes a loaded gun. One trap is commercial real estate, the dead mall, and the empty office tower. In a low-rate era, property owners borrowed like kings. They signed loans when money was cheap and buildings were full. Then remote work hollowed out the towers. E-commerce drained the storefronts. Suddenly the collateral looked like a costume. By 2026, the refinancing wall hits like concrete. Imagine a loan taken at 3%, now needing 8%. Imagine rent rolls shrinking while costs rise. The building's market value drops, but the debt stays the same. That's how you get underwater without seeing water. The bank holds that loan as an asset. It looks fine in a spreadsheet until it doesn't. The borrower misses payments. The appraisals come in lower. The loan has to be marked down. That's when the ledger starts bleeding. And it's not one building, it's thousands. A slow-motion demolition across cities where office demand never fully returns. Downtown corridors that used to glow at lunch hour now feel like abandoned film sets. The banks that concentrated in these loans didn't just take risk, they married it. Then comes the second trap, the bond portfolio, the so-called safe pile. Banks bought government, debt, and mortgage-backed securities like they were stacking bricks. In 2021, a 10-year bond yielding 1.5% felt harmless. In 2026, that same bond is a liability in disguise. Here's the brutal math. When new bonds pay higher yields, old low-yield bonds become less valuable. Their price falls. If the bank has to sell, the loss becomes real. Until then, it can hide in accounting shadows, unrealized, unconfessed, like rot behind a painted wall. Let that number sink in. If a bank bought $10 billion of long-duration bonds at the top, a 15% decline is $1.5 billion gone. Not maybe. Gone. The ledger doesn't care if the lobby looks calm. Now add the third trap, the one that feels abstract until it bites. Derivatives, the invisible wiring of modern finance. They are bets layered on bets, contracts tied to rates, credit, and property values. They are supposed to hedge risk. In practice, they can concentrate it. Derivatives don't explode when everything is fine. They explode when volatility spikes and counterparties get nervous. One failure forces another. Margin calls arrive like eviction notices. Liquidity vanishes. And suddenly the system that looked diversified becomes a single connected fuse. The spiral begins in ordinary days, not dramatic nights. A regional bank reports strong capital while quietly losing deposits. Another bank raises rates on savings accounts to keep customers from leaving. That means higher costs. That means thinner margins. That means less cushion when losses appear. By March 2026, the rumors aren't about one bank. They're about categories. Banks with high office exposure. Banks with high uninsured deposits. Banks with large securities losses. The market loves a label because labels let panic travel faster. The first blow is slow. Deposits drift out, not in a stampede. People move money to money market funds. Businesses sweep cash to treasuries. Wealthy depositors split accounts across institutions. Each move looks rational. Together they are a silent run. Then comes the second blow. Credit tightens. Banks start refusing renewals. Lines of credit shrink. Commercial borrowers who relied on rolling debt hit a wall. They miss payments. Delinquencies rise. The asset starts to look like a corpse. Then the third blow lands. The securities portfolio becomes a trap when liquidity is needed. Deposits leave, so the bank needs cash. To get cash, it sells bonds. To sell bonds, it realizes losses. Those losses hit capital. Capital drops. Regulators notice. The market smells blood. The rule of three is ruthless. The deposits were gone. The credit was frozen. The collateral had collapsed. This is tragic momentum. Not drama. Physics. You can see it on a balance sheet like bruises. Assets shrinking in value. Liabilities staying rigid. Equity narrowing to a razor's edge. The bank can still open its doors, but it's already insolvent in spirit. The ledger has already written the ending, and then the smoking gun moment. It won't look cinematic. It will look like a meeting, a conference call, a document circulated at midnight, a regulator's letter, a special assessment, a temporary facility. Words that sound boring, but mean the ship is taking water. Picture an emergency meeting on a Friday evening in 2026. Executives sit in a glass room with cold coffee and open laptops. A government official speaks in calm sentences that feel like knives. The message is simple, even if the language is polite. Your funding is unstable. Your liquidity is insufficient. You need a buyer. This isn't a rescue. It's a foreclosure. The bank isn't negotiating from strength. It's negotiating from hunger. The bidders know the target is bleeding. They offer pennies for assets and demand guarantees for liabilities. It's a liquidation sale conducted in suits. Someone says, "We have options." Another voice, quieter, says, "Not if deposits keep leaving." The truth is always a whisper at first. Then it becomes the only sound in the room. The brutal reality of these negotiations is never about pride. It's about who eats the losses. The acquiring bank wants protection. The government wants speed. The depositors want access. And the shareholders, they become ghosts. A stock price can't argue with insolvency. Now comes the climax, the default in everything but name. The moment money runs out is rarely a single second. It's a sequence. The bank can't meet withdrawal demands. It can't raise emergency funding without pledging everything. It can't sell assets without detonating losses. Then it can't open on Monday. The public learns the truth in the worst way. A card declines at a gas station. An online transfer fails. An app shows an error message like a locked door. People stand outside branches before sunrise, clutching ID cards like passports. They aren't trying to get rich. They're trying to get bread. This is where the social consequence hits. Not theoretical. Physical. Small businesses can't make payroll. Pharmacies can't restock. Families feel the cold panic of being temporarily cashless. And humiliation spreads because the system promised safety. You start hearing the same phrase everywhere, spoken like a curse. FDIC. Insurance limit. But insurance doesn't mean instant. It means eventual. And in a crisis, time is the real currency. Sovereignty is solvency. That line sounds dramatic until you watch a community learn it. When your money is trapped, your choices shrink. You can't move. You can't buy. You can't negotiate. You become dependent on whoever controls the next decision. The state steps in because it must. It announces emergency measures over a weekend when markets are closed and people are tired. Officials say the system is sound. They always say that. Then they introduce a facility, a guarantee, a merger, a backstop. But every backstop has a price. If the government absorbs losses, it shifts them. If the central bank prints, it dilutes. The bailout doesn't disappear. It changes form. It becomes inflation, that invisible tax that never needs a vote. Think about the scale of that. A bank's bad bets don't evaporate into air. They move on to someone else's ledger. If the Fed buys impaired assets at generous prices, the public pays through purchasing power. Your savings stay the same number, but buy less food, less fuel, less time. And that is the sinister genius of modern crisis management. The system can claim depositors were made whole while quietly amputating their real wealth. No riot needed, just slow debasement. This is why 2026 feels different in the story. Not because collapse is guaranteed in one neat day, but because the ingredients converge: high refinancing needs, elevated rates, weakened commercial property, hidden bond losses, a derivatives web that tightens under stress. Each factor alone is survivable. Together they are a chokehold. If you want to understand which institutions are at risk, you don't start with rumors. You start with the ledger. You ask three ugly questions. How much commercial real estate exposure do they carry? How big are their unrealized losses? How dependent are they on uninsured deposits? Uninsured deposits are the jittery ones. They are big corporate cash piles and wealthy accounts above insurance caps. Those depositors do not wait for reassurance. They move first because they can. And when they move, they pull oxygen out of the room. A bank can survive bad loans if funding is stable. It can survive deposit outflows if assets are liquid. It can survive paper losses if it never sells. But it cannot survive all three failures at once. That's insolvency wearing three different masks. Now let's talk about what you do, because the ledger doesn't care if you were warned. First, you learn the limits of the safety net. Insurance caps matter. Account structure matters. Ownership category matters. If you keep too much in one place, you concentrate risk for no reward. Second, you diversify the places where your cash sleeps. Not different branches, different institutions. If one door locks, another stays open. The goal isn't paranoia, it's redundancy. You don't keep one spare tire, you keep the tools to change it. Third, you consider assets that don't depend on a bank's promise. Hard assets are not magic. They can fluctuate. They can be inconvenient, but they don't default because a committee panicked. Gold doesn't need a bailout. Silver doesn't need a liquidity facility. Fourth, you keep a small physical cash cushion, not to live in fear, to buy time. To keep your household functioning if digital rails freeze for a week. Cash is ugly and simple, and in a crisis, ugly and simple wins. Fifth, you learn how to park money in short-term government instruments, like treasury bills or treasury-backed funds. It's not romance, it's risk management. The government can print its way out, for better or worse. A regional bank cannot. Sixth, you think about custody. A safe deposit box inside a bank is still inside the system. If the doors lock, your box is just a memory. Control matters more than convenience when the system becomes hostile. Seventh, you prepare before the headlines, because the headlines arrive late. By the time the news says concerns, the smart money has already moved. By the time they say contained, the ledger is already screaming. Now imagine the crisis in phases, because that's how it unfolds. Phase 1 is a single institution, wobbling. Its stock drops. Analysts cut ratings. Social media spreads screenshots. The bank issues a statement that sounds confident and reads like a eulogy. Phase 2 is contagion. Depositors at similar banks start acting. It becomes a category problem. Transfers surge. Customer service lines jam. Apps lag. Even healthy banks get tested because a bank is only as strong as its depositors' patience. Phase 3 is policy. Weekend announcements. Emergency lending. Special guarantees. And always the quiet admission that something broke. Officials don't create temporary programs when everything is fine. If you're watching this and thinking, this sounds extreme, good. That discomfort is your instincts waking up. But preparation is not hysteria. Preparation is respect for math. Because the cost of preparing is small. Splitting accounts costs almost nothing. Learning treasury tools costs a weekend. Holding a modest emergency fund costs some convenience. The cost of not preparing can be catastrophic if access is delayed at the wrong moment. This is the real thriller of finance. It's not explosions, it's signatures, it's spreadsheets. It's a world where a single line item can starve a town of liquidity. It's a world where unrealized losses become realized the moment confidence snaps. Now the generational aftermath, the part nobody narrates because it's slow and unglamorous. After a banking shock, behavior changes for decades. People stop trusting institutions. They hoard. They withdraw. They demand higher wages because prices rose. They avoid risk because the last risk felt like betrayal. A crisis writes itself into culture. It changes how parents talk about money at dinner. It changes how businesses hold cash. It changes politics because anger loves a target. But the target is rarely the real culprit. The real culprit is the ledger's logic. If you build a system addicted to cheap money, you will suffer withdrawal. If you build a system that promises instant liquidity on long-duration assets, you create a mismatch. If you hide losses until forced to reveal them, you create a cliff. And when the cliff arrives, it doesn't care who you voted for. It doesn't care what you believe. The balance sheet is not moral. It is mechanical. That's the line that ties history together. Empires don't fall because they lose battles. They fall because they can't pay. They fall because creditors stop lending. They fall because resources get scarce and debt gets heavy. In every era, the uniforms change. The ledger stays the same. So if you take one lesson from this documentary, let it be this. Don't watch the theater. Watch the accounting. Don't trust the speech. Trust the balance sheet. Don't wait for permission to protect yourself. If you want to stay ahead of the next collapse, subscribe to this channel. Not for panic, for pattern recognition. Because most people learn history after it happens. You're here to learn it before the ledger collects its debt?